He stopped mid-step in the locker room, the sound of laughter fading like a radio losing signal. The phone vibrated once more. He answered. A nurse's voice, steady, practiced, said the words that changed the temperature of a life. Coach Daniels, terminally ill. Giannis didn't blink. The clock on the wall kept ticking, rude and ordinary. Sweat cooled on his back. The air shrank. Memories arrived in quick cuts. A dusty court, a hand on his shoulder, the first time someone called him son. He sat. He listened to the breathing on the other end. Fame went quiet. Faith leaned in. And the game of the night, sold out, loud, inevitable, suddenly felt small because the hardest opponent had finally shown up. Time and mercy. For most of the world, Giannis Antetokounmpo is the force that bends games. Strength in motion, wingspan carving lanes. A champion whose story reads like a rumor that refused to die. But greatness, the kind that lasts after the jersey is folded, never begins under bright lights. It starts in ordinary rooms with ordinary people who decide to be extraordinary for someone else. For Giannis, that person had a name and a whistle. Coach Daniels. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich. He had a tired car, a tired smile, and a habit of speaking to potential like it was already awake. He found a teenager who ran faster than his shoes could survive, who dribbled past doubt the way rain passes a window, constant, unnoticed, and there. He taught him form, patience, and something rarer than talent, how to carry a future without dropping the present. Years pushed forward as years do. Flights, cameras, parades, replies postponed until tomorrow and then postponed again. The mentor stepped back into the crowd the way dusk steps into evening, quietly, respectfully, almost invisible. Gratitude lived in Giannis like a heartbeat, but even gratitude can lose to calendars. Then came the call, the kind of call that rearranges priorities with a sentence. Terminal, ill, words too heavy for one breath. The room did what grief always does to rooms. It shrank. And the question arrived, simple and holy. What do you do for the person who helped you become yourself? This isn't a highlight reel. It isn't gossip. It is a human debt being paid in the only currency that counts when trophies stop shining: presence. He will go, not as a star performing rescue, but as a man returning home. He will listen more than he speaks. He will choose memory over schedule, a dying teacher over a living crowd. And because goodness is louder in whispers than in speeches, most of it will happen where cameras cannot breathe. If you've ever had a voice that steadied your steps, a hand that lifted your chin, this story is yours too. Tonight the scoreboard will matter and then it won't. What will remain is a promise kept, a legacy extended, and a lesson the world keeps forgetting. The measure of a champion is not how high he jumps, but how deeply he remembers. And when memory leads, even giants kneel quietly before the ordinary miracles of gratitude. He had just finished practice when his phone began to buzz. It wasn't unusual. Giannis was used to constant noise. Calls from sponsors, messages from teammates, reminders from his manager. But this one felt different, like a low vibration that carried weight instead of sound. He looked at the screen. The name almost slipped past him. Coach Daniels. At first he smiled. It had been months since they'd spoken, and he imagined a familiar laugh, maybe a story about one of the old training days. But when he answered, the silence on the other side didn't feel like nostalgia. It felt like goodbye waiting to happen. Giannis, a woman's voice said softly. I'm calling from Mercy General Hospital. His breath shortened. Hospitals always sounded sterile, distant. But this one felt close. Too close. The voice continued, steady and kind. I'm calling about Coach Daniels. He wanted you to know he's still thinking of you. But the doctors, they don't think he has much time left. For a long second, he didn't move. The ball at his feet rolled gently toward the locker wall and stopped. His teammates kept joking nearby, tossing towels, blasting music. The world carried on. But Giannis wasn't in it anymore. He lowered himself to the bench. The air changed temperature. The smell of sweat and soap turned into something sharp, the scent of memory. He stared at his phone, still glowing with the hospital's number. He thought he was ready for anything. He wasn't ready for this. The nurse's words blurred. Phrases like, "No cure," "Stage 4," "He wanted you to know," drifted through the fog. His hand covered his mouth, his body frozen halfway between disbelief and guilt. How long had it been since their last talk? Since the last time he'd said thank you? When he finally spoke, his voice cracked like an old floorboard. "Can I talk to him?" A pause, then quietly, "He's resting now, but I'll tell him you called." That sentence, simple, gentle, hurt more than any loss he'd faced on the court. Resting now. The same words people used when they didn't want to say dying. He closed his eyes. For a moment, the noise of the locker room faded completely. All he could hear was the echo of a voice from years ago. "You don't play for points, son. You play for purpose." Coach Daniels had said that in Athens, when the world still doubted the boy selling sunglasses on the street could ever touch an NBA floor, he was more than a coach. He was the first believer. And now the first believer was leaving the arena for good. Giannis stood up, unable to sit still. He grabbed his hoodie, his phone still in his hand, as if the connection might open again if he just waited long enough. A teammate called out, "Yo, Giannis, you good?" He nodded without looking. "Yeah, just something personal." He walked out of the locker room and into the tunnel that led to the parking lot. The air outside was cold, biting, the kind of air that stings when you breathe too fast. He took a deep breath anyway. His chest felt heavy, like it was full of wet cement. The city lights blurred as he drove. The radio was off, the phone silent. In the passenger seat, his gym bag sat half open, and inside it an old notebook poked out, the one Coach Daniels had given him years ago. On the first page, "Work hard, stay humble, be thankful." He pulled over near the arena, parked by the quiet side entrance, and rested his forehead on the steering wheel. His mind wasn't replaying highlight reels or MVP speeches. It was replaying that dusty gym in Greece, the way Daniels shouted through broken English, "Again, Giannis, you can rest when the dream rests." And now the dream was awake, but the voice that built it was fading. He whispered into the silence, "You gave me everything, Coach. Everything." He didn't know if the man could hear him, but somehow it didn't matter. Some prayers don't need reception, only intention. And that night, for the first time in years, the champion who never stopped running didn't know where to go next. Athens was still a place that smelled like rain on concrete and bread from street carts when Giannis first met Coach Daniels. He was 15, tall but all elbows and knees, carrying a basketball that looked too clean for the cracked court he played on. His family couldn't afford much, but somehow his mother kept that ball spotless, as if it were sacred. Daniels was standing at the far end of the court, clipboard in hand, talking to a local scout. He was older, American, with that mix of patience and sharpness that came from decades of watching kids try and fail to be something more. His eyes followed Giannis as he ran, awkward, but relentless. "That kid doesn't stop," Daniels muttered. "He's fast," the scout said, "but he's raw." "So was every great thing before it learned how to breathe," Daniels replied. That was how it started, not with a scholarship or a spotlight, but with a man noticing effort before perfection. Giannis didn't speak much English then, but he understood tone. When Daniels shouted "good," he smiled. When he said "again," he ran harder. And on that cracked Athens court, a seed was planted, the kind that grows in silence, waiting for its moment to touch the sky. Training with Daniels wasn't glamorous. It was running hills at dawn, dribbling until his fingers blistered, doing the same move 100 times until it felt like breathing. The man pushed him, but never cruelly. He coached like someone saving a life, not winning a game. "Basketball's not about the rim," he said once. "It's about who you become trying to reach it." Giannis remembered that line every time his legs gave out, every time hunger clawed at his stomach before practice. Every time he had to jog home past the shops that smelled of food he couldn't buy. One day after training, Daniels stopped him. "You've got the gift," he said. "But the gift's not talent, it's faith. You don't have much, but you believe. That's why you'll make it." Giannis didn't fully understand the words, but the tone sank deep. Daniels didn't just coach, he filled gaps that hunger left behind. He brought sandwiches wrapped in napkins, told stories about how he once coached in the States, and how belief was worth more than a paycheck. When Giannis's shoes split at the seams, Daniels taped them himself, saying, "These shoes carried you this far. Let's see how far they can still go." Neither of them knew that one day the world would watch those taped shoes walk into NBA arenas under blinding lights. The years blurred. Seasons turned into markers of growth. Daniel started calling him son, and Giannis never corrected him. His real father was working endless hours to keep food on the table. Daniels became the voice that filled the spaces between exhaustion and hope. When scouts from bigger clubs came, it was Daniels who convinced them to stay until the final game. When papers needed signatures, it was Daniels who translated. When critics said, "He's too skinny," it was Daniels who replied, "You're mistaking humility for weakness." There was a day Giannis never forgot, the first time he dunked. It wasn't in front of a crowd. It was in a half-empty gym with flickering lights. He landed, turned, and Daniels was clapping, smiling wide. "That," he said, "wasn't just a dunk, that was proof." Giannis laughed, breathless. Proof of what? Proof that faith can jump. Those words became the rhythm of his career. Proof that faith can jump. Proof that belief can rebound from anything. When the NBA scouts finally called, Daniels didn't celebrate. He just nodded and said, "Don't thank me. Just keep doing good with what you've been given." Giannis promised he would. He hugged him tightly. Too tightly, maybe. The kind of hug that said everything words couldn't. But life has a way of stretching promises thin. Distance arrived quietly. Flights, interviews, schedules, cities. Calls became texts. Texts became silence. Daniel stayed in Athens, coaching new kids who reminded him of the boy who once trained until nightfall. He'd turn on the TV sometimes, see Giannis on the screen and whisper, "That's my kid." And though Giannis never stopped thinking of him, he always thought there'd be time. Time to visit. Time to thank him properly. Time to keep the promise. Until one night, years later, a phone buzzed in a crowded locker room, and time answered back. And as Giannis sat in silence, the echoes of that cracked court in Athens came rushing back. Proof that faith could jump, but it couldn't outrun goodbye. The first thing Daniels ever taught Giannis wasn't how to dribble. It was how to breathe. "You can't control the game if you can't control yourself," he'd say, tapping his chest. Every champion learns that before the spotlight finds him. And so, before the shoes, before the fame, there was silence. Just the echo of a ball, a whistle, and a boy learning to breathe through pain. Daniels became more than a coach. He became rhythm, structure, the steady drum behind the chaos of life in Athens. He'd show up to Giannis's practices even when his car coughed smoke and the rain soaked the wooden floor. Sometimes he'd bring old VHS tapes of Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson. He'd point at the screen and say, "See, they believed before they were believed in." And in that gym where dreams echoed louder than applause, belief became the new language between them. When Giannis's father couldn't come to a tournament, Daniels was there. When he failed his English test, Daniels stayed after practice, scribbling words on scrap paper, repeating them slowly until they made sense. When the family struggled to buy groceries, Daniels would hand him an envelope after training. "For travel," he'd say, though everyone knew it was more than that. He didn't make a show of kindness. He made it normal. And that's what Giannis loved about him. He taught him that goodness could be quiet. There was one afternoon that stayed engraved in his memory. A storm hit Athens, wind bending the trees, thunder shaking the gym. The other players left early, but Giannis stayed. Daniels turned off the lights except for one over the rim. "Why stay, kid?" "Because storms don't wait," Giannis replied, panting. "So I won't either." Daniels smiled. "Then remember this moment. One day you'll be in a different kind of storm, and the only thing that'll keep you standing is what you're doing right now. That line became his prayer, years before anyone called him the Greek freak. Because every empire starts with someone who refuses to stop when the rain begins. They built a bond that wasn't written anywhere. No paperwork, no sponsorship, no photo ops. Just trust. Daniels saw him not as a future athlete, but as a boy who was starving for direction, in both senses of the word. He'd drive him home after practice, through narrow Athens streets lit by orange lamps. Giannis would sit quietly in the passenger seat, clutching his worn-out shoes. Daniels would tell stories about his time coaching in Chicago, about losing games, about faith being tested. "You know, Giannis," he said once, "talent is a whisper, discipline is a shout, but character, that's the echo that never dies." Years later, when Giannis faced critics, losses, and fame's hollow rooms, those words would return, not as advice, but as armor. And yet, despite the bond, life wasn't kind to Daniels. He was already older, his health unpredictable. Sometimes, after long drills, Giannis would notice the man sitting on the bench, holding his chest as if catching his breath too slowly. He'd ask, "Coach, you okay?" And Daniels, ever proud, would grin. "Just an old engine, kid. Still runs fine." But Giannis could see it, the fatigue behind the humor. He wanted to do something, but back then all he had were dreams and taped shoes. When the day came for Giannis to leave Greece for the NBA draft, the airport was small, the goodbye smaller. Daniels handed him an envelope with a folded note and said, "Open it when you forget who you are." They hugged, awkward, tight, unsaid things hanging in the air. Then Giannis left. On the flight, he opened the note. It said only 7 words. "Don't let success make you smaller." He kept it in his wallet for years. But over time, even memories fade when the world gets loud. And somewhere between the flashing lights and roaring crowds, the boy who once learned to breathe forgot to call the man who taught him how. Success has a strange way of stretching the space between people. At first it feels harmless, a few missed calls, a later that turns into someday. Then without warning, you realize someday has been gone for years. For Giannis, that space began with noise, the constant buzz of lights, cameras, and schedules that filled every hour after the draft. There were contracts to sign, jerseys to lift, flights to catch. Everywhere he turned, someone needed him for something. And every time he thought of calling Coach Daniels, he told himself, "Tomorrow. He'll understand." But tomorrow has a way of disappearing when you're chasing dreams. At first, Daniels would send short messages. "Proud of you, son. Keep the faith. Remember Athens." Giannis would reply, sometimes days later, "Thank you, coach." Then the reply slowed and the world sped up. The boy from Greece had become a headline. And in that transformation, something sacred went quiet. The louder the applause grew, the harder it became to hear the voice that started it all. There was one night mid-season after a win that should have felt like glory. Reporters filled the locker room, microphones pointing like arrows. Giannis smiled for the cameras, said all the right things. But when the lights shut off and the crowd noise faded, he sat alone staring at the empty benches. The silence after victory is louder than most people can handle. He reached for his phone, opened his contacts, scrolled down. Coach Daniels. His thumb hovered there. Just a second. Then someone knocked on the door. "Giannis, media's waiting." He turned off the screen. "Coming." That was the last time he almost called. Meanwhile, across the world, in a smaller gym with cracked floors and borrowed basketballs, Daniels was still showing up. He'd point at the kids and say, "You know who trained right here? The best man I ever coached." The kids would laugh, not really believing. Daniels would chuckle too, cough a bit, and keep going. Pride doesn't need proof when your heart knows what it built. But nights grew longer. The coughs lasted more. And sometimes, when he sat alone in that same dusty gym, he'd look up at the rim and whisper, "You kept your promise, kid. You made me proud." He never said it with bitterness, just gratitude wrapped in fatigue. Even love can grow tired when the echo never answers back. Fame brought Giannis everything he once prayed for, and a few things he didn't. He'd wake up in five-star hotels, eat food that didn't taste like anything, sign autographs for people who knew his stats but not his soul. He missed the way Daniels used to talk about basketball like a metaphor for life, not a scoreboard. He missed the smell of that old gym. He missed the sound of a voice that didn't need him to perform. He carried that folded note in his wallet everywhere. Whenever he felt lost, he'd take it out and stare at it. Don't let success make you smaller. It was both a blessing and a wound. During interviews, when people asked who inspired him, he'd say, "My family." And that was true. But another name always sat behind the words, unspoken. A name that belonged to the man who taught him how to believe. He thought there would be time to thank him properly. One off-season, he even looked up flights to Greece. He found Daniel's old number, saved under Coach D. But his finger never pressed call. There was always another meeting, another camp, another reason to wait. Then one day, an article surfaced. A local piece about Coach Daniels still training neighborhood kids. The headline read, "Old coach still teaching lessons off the court." Giannis smiled when he read it. He told himself, he's fine, he's still coaching. He saved the article on his phone. He didn't know it would be the last picture ever taken of Daniels, standing next to a cracked backboard, holding a whistle, grin soft but tired. Distance doesn't ask for permission. It just moves in quietly, until one phone call reminds you how far away you've drifted. The day started like any other. Drills, sweat, reporters, noise. Giannis was halfway through tying his shoes when his phone buzzed on the bench. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, until he saw the prefix. Greece. Something in his stomach tightened. He picked up. "Hello? Mr. Antetokounmpo?" "Yes." "This is Helen, from Mercy General Hospital in Athens. I'm calling about Coach Daniels." The name cut through everything. The air, the sound, the moment. Helen spoke gently, the way nurses do when they've made this call before. "He wanted us to reach you. He's been fighting for some time, but it's getting harder now. He mentioned you often." Giannis didn't move, didn't breathe. The words "getting harder" echoed in his chest like a ball hitting the rim and not falling through. He tried to speak, failed. Can I talk to him? He's resting now, but he asked us to tell you he's proud, and that he never stopped watching your games." He closed his eyes. The locker room around him was full of laughter and chatter, yet he was miles away. It was like standing inside a memory while the world kept running past. He thought the world would stop with him. It didn't, and that made it worse. Giannis hung up slowly, staring at the floor as the screen dimmed. His hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, but from something older, something raw. It had been years since he'd last heard that voice, and now all the things he'd meant to say crowded in his throat like traffic in a storm. He sat in silence for a long time. When he finally spoke, it was to no one. "I should have called him." He whispered it again, softer this time. "I should have called him." Regret is a quiet thing. It doesn't shout. It sits beside you like an old friend and reminds you of every chance you didn't take. The next morning, he skipped practice. He told his manager he needed a personal day. He didn't elaborate. He booked the flight to Athens himself, first available. No assistants, no PR team. Just a name, a destination, and the weight of years pressing against his chest. He wasn't flying to Greece as an NBA star. He was flying home as a son who'd waited too long to say thank you. On the plane, everything felt slower. He pulled out his wallet and unfolded the small, creased note Daniels had given him. "Don't let success make you smaller." He ran his thumb over the ink, faded from sweat and time. A tear slipped down his cheek before he even noticed. He remembered the old man's laugh, the way he'd clap after every drill, the way he'd say, "Again," until Giannis could barely stand. He remembered the day Daniels first called him kid. He remembered the day he said, "You'll change the world someday." And he remembered how he never said goodbye properly. The plane touched down at dawn. Athens looked smaller now, not in size but in pace. The streets that once felt endless now looked like postcards from another life. As the taxi drove toward the hospital, Giannis stared out the window. The old markets, the street corner where he used to sell sunglasses, the bakery where his mother once bought bread. And just for a second he thought he saw that same cracked basketball court through the mist. Empty, waiting, eternal. At the hospital, the receptionist looked up. "You're here to see Mr. Daniels?" "Yes. He's been expecting you." That sentence hit harder than any headline. Expecting you. As if the man had known he would come all along. He walked down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. Fluorescent lights hummed above. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Every sound felt too loud, every heartbeat too slow. He stopped at the door marked Room 14B. For a long time, he couldn't open it. His hand hovered over the handle, shaking slightly. Inside, a faint beeping kept time with a breathing machine. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a pale strip of morning light. And there he was, smaller, thinner, older, but still Daniels. Still the same man who'd taught him to never stop. Giannis stepped closer. The coach's eyes opened slowly, and when they met, both men smiled. No words, no hesitation, just recognition. Daniels reached for his hand. His voice, faint but steady, carried more power than a stadium. "You came?" Giannis nodded, holding back tears. "Of course I did, Coach." Daniels chuckled weakly. "Took you long enough." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes when forgiveness meets love halfway. For the first time in years, time didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like mercy, giving them one last quarter to play together. The room was dim, washed in that kind of hospital light that seems too clean for the stories it witnesses. A tray of untouched food sat near the bed. A TV played softly on mute. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and wilted flowers. Giannis stepped closer, the sound of his shoes muffled against the tile. Daniels looked smaller than memory allowed, a man carved thinner by time, by effort, by the price of caring too much. But when he smiled, the room warmed. "Sit down, kid," Daniels said, voice soft but still carrying that old authority. "You look taller than I remember." Giannis pulled a chair beside the bed. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred, heavy with all the words they'd never said. Then Giannis exhaled, finally finding his voice. "I should have called." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You were living the dream. I told you to chase it. I didn't teach you to stay in one place, did I?" "Still," Giannis looked at the floor, "I owed you more than that." The old man smiled faintly. "You owed me nothing. You kept the promise." Giannis frowned. He didn't remember making one, at least not out loud, but Daniels did, because mentors always remember the promises students forget. Daniels motioned toward the window. "You remember what I told you back in Athens? You can rest when the dream rests? Well, I've been watching. You haven't rested yet." Giannis let out a quiet laugh, the kind that cracks through pain. "You always said that." "Because it's true. Dreams don't stop. But listen, Giannis, even dreams need someone to pass the ball to when they're tired." He reached for the bedside table and pulled out a folded photo, worn, creased, faded. It showed a young Giannis in Athens, mid-jump, Daniels in the background clapping, blurry from motion. "You remember this?" "How could I forget? That was the first time I believed in something again." "You gave me that, kid." Giannis swallowed hard. "You gave me everything." Daniels shook his head. "No, I just pointed to the rim. You did the jumping." They sat in silence again. The only sound was the rhythmic pulse of the monitor marking each second they still had. Daniels coughed, wincing, but waved off the nurse who started to approach. "I'm fine. I've got one more game in me." He looked back at Giannis. "You know what hurts the most?" Giannis hesitated. "What, coach?" "Not the sickness, not the years. It's that most people don't get to see their work last. But I did. Every time you step on that court, I see it." The words hit harder than any loss. Because for Giannis, that court suddenly felt smaller, like it could never hold the weight of what it meant. Giannis stood and moved closer, kneeling beside the bed. He took Daniel's frail hand gently between his own, the same hands that once caught rebounds that now trembled but still held purpose. "You taught me faith, coach. You made me believe I could be more than a story." Daniel's eyes glistened. "You already were, kid. You just needed someone to remind you." The nurse quietly adjusted the IV. Daniels gave her a wink. "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere yet. Got things to say." He turned back to Giannis. "You remember when I told you about my son?" "Yeah, he passed away, right?" "Leukemia. He was about your age when I lost him. That's why I started coaching again. I thought maybe I could save somebody else's future, even if I couldn't save his." The words cut through Giannis like glass, gentle but sharp, full of meaning that suddenly rearranged every memory. "I didn't know. You weren't supposed to. It wasn't your burden." Daniel smiled, tired, but peaceful. "But you filled the space, Giannis. You became the son I didn't get to finish raising." Tears welled up in Giannis's eyes, unstoppable this time. He gripped the old man's hand tighter. "And you became the father I didn't get to keep." Neither spoke after that. They just sat there, a silence made of everything right and everything lost. Outside, the sun began to rise higher. Light slipped between the curtains, turning the edges of the room gold. For a brief second, the hospital didn't look like a place of endings, but a place of grace. Daniel smiled faintly, eyes drifting toward the window. "See that light, kid? That's how faith looks. Cold at first, but warm when it finds you." Giannis nodded, whispering, "Yeah, I see it." The monitor beeped steady, steady, steady. And in that small hospital room, time did what it rarely does. It slowed down just long enough for love to finish what life started. They talked for hours, though time felt weightless inside that room. The nurse came and went quietly, changing fluids, checking charts, pretending not to notice the two men holding on to every word like it might be their last. Giannis leaned back in the chair, eyes red but calm. Daniel's breathing was slower now, yet steady, like he was pacing himself through one final quarter. "You remember that storm back in Athens?" Daniels asked suddenly. Giannis smiled through the ache. "The one where everyone left and I stayed?" "That's the one. I thought you were crazy. You told me crazy people change the world." Daniels laughed, a raspy, fading sound that still somehow filled the room. "Did I really say that?" "Yeah, right before the ceiling started leaking." They both laughed, and for a moment, the beeping machines and the hospital air disappeared. They were back in that small gym again, rain tapping on the roof, thunder echoing over the court. Just a coach and a boy chasing something invisible, unstoppable. Because some memories don't fade, they wait. And when pain comes, they return to remind you who you are. Daniels wiped at his eyes. "You were different, you know. Most kids wanted to be famous. You just wanted to make your mama proud." Giannis nodded softly. "She was the reason I never quit, but you were the reason I knew how not to." Daniels looked down, smiling. "I wasn't sure you'd remember that. I remember everything, coach. Every word, every drill. Even the time you threw the whistle at me because I missed a free throw." Daniels chuckled. "You were getting cocky. Had to bring you back down to earth." Giannis shook his head, laughing quietly. "You always did. Someone had to. Fame's a good thing to earn, but a terrible thing to live inside." There was a pause, the kind that comes when truth lands heavy. Giannis looked at him, eyes soft. "You never asked for anything, did you?" I had everything I needed. Daniels coughed lightly. A ball, a gym, and one kid who actually listened. Giannis grinned. Not always. True, but enough to make it count. Silence again. Comfortable, warm, like a blanket shared between them. Daniel's eyes drifted toward the window. You know, when I got sick, I didn't tell anyone for months. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to keep coaching until the whistle blew for good. Giannis lowered his head. I should have been there. Stop, don't carry that. I didn't raise you to drown in guilt. I raised you to swim through it. He realized then, the man in that hospital bed wasn't dying. He was still teaching. They talked about Athens, the early tournaments, the first NBA tryout, the nights Giannis wanted to quit. Daniels remembered it all. His hunger, his humility, his fire. You had this way of turning pain into rhythm, Daniels said, smiling faintly. That's how I knew you were different. You never played angry. You played thankful. Giannis felt his throat tighten. You taught me that. No, I reminded you. Gratitude was already in your bones. You just needed permission to use it. He nodded slowly, blinking back tears. You always saw more in me than I saw in myself. That's the job, kid, to see the next version of someone before they do. The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't heavy. It was full. Full of everything they'd built, everything they'd survived. Then Daniels reached for something on the bedside table, a small faded keychain shaped like a basketball. Remember this? Giannis gasped. No way. You still have that? Of course. You gave it to me before you left for America. Said it was for good luck. He pressed it into Giannis's hand. Now it's yours again. Giannis closed his fist around it, shaking his head. I can't take this. Yes, you can. You'll need it more than me now. The world's heavier than it used to be. The keychain was old, scratched, the paint chipped. But it felt warm, not because of the metal, but because of what it carried. Giannis held it tightly, then looked at him. I don't know how to say goodbye. Daniels smiled softly. Then don't. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Teach someone the way I taught you. Find a kid who's lost, who doesn't believe yet. Pass it on. Giannis nodded slowly. His chest felt like it was splitting open. I will. Good, Daniels whispered. Then this wasn't a goodbye, just a handoff. And in that moment, Giannis realized, legacies don't die. They just switch hands. The sun had started to fall behind the city, turning the hospital window into a canvas of soft orange light. Shadows stretched long across the floor, reaching all the way to the foot of the bed. Daniel's breathing had grown slower. Every word now came out wrapped in effort, but never without intention. He reached toward the table beside him. There, wrapped in an old towel, sat a basketball, faded, scuffed, with a strip of tape crossing its surface. The same ball they had trained with years ago, back on that cracked court in Athens. Giannis blinked, almost in disbelief. You kept it? Daniels smiled weakly. Couldn't throw it away. Too many stories in that leather. Giannis took the ball carefully, holding it like something sacred. He could still see the fingerprints of time on it, the scratches, the worn seams, the memory of 1,000 mornings and nights. You remember the first time you touched this? Daniels asked. Yeah, Giannis said softly. You told me it wasn't just a ball, it was a promise. Still is. Some promises outlive the hands that made them. Daniels motioned for him to sit closer. I want you to keep it, he whispered. Giannis shook his head immediately. No, coach. That's yours. Not anymore. It was never mine to keep. It was mine to pass on. He coughed lightly, struggling for breath, but his eyes didn't waver. You see, Giannis, I didn't save you because you were talented. I saved you because you reminded me what faith looks like. You reminded me of my son. The sentence hit like lightning. Quiet, bright, irreversible. Giannis's grip on the ball tightened. His throat ached. Coach, Daniels smiled. He'd be about your age now. Every time I saw you fight through something, I saw him too. That's what kept me going. The room fell into silence again, and the weight of the unspoken settled between them. You did more than coach me, Giannis said finally. You gave me a reason to believe when life didn't. And you proved me right, Daniels murmured. He closed his eyes for a moment, catching his breath. When he opened them again, they were softer, dimmer, but still full of light. Take that ball, use it to teach. Not basketball, faith, discipline, grace, the things the scoreboard never shows. Giannis nodded, swallowing hard. I will. Daniels smiled, his voice now barely above a whisper. Good. Then I can rest easy. My job's done. He said it like a man finishing a prayer, not ending a life. The nurse came in quietly, adjusting the monitor. She gave Giannis a look, a silent kindness that said this is almost it. But Giannis didn't leave. He couldn't. He stayed there, his hands resting on the ball, his other hand holding the frail one beside it. Coach, he whispered, you said I could rest when the dream rests, but what happens when you rest? Daniel smiled, his breathing uneven but peaceful. Then the dream keeps running. In you. The words lingered in the air, heavy and holy. Giannis bowed his head. For the first time in a long time, he prayed, not for victory, not for strength, but for peace. Minutes passed like hours. Daniel's eyes drifted to the window. The sky outside had turned gold, that same gold that used to spill through the gym windows in Athens. He looked at it, then back at Giannis. Don't cry for me, kid. The good ones never really leave. They just change jerseys. A tear escaped before Giannis could stop it. He squeezed the coach's hand, the one that had shaped his entire future. Daniels smiled one last time, faint but eternal. Go win something that matters. And then, the beeping slowed. Once, twice. Silence. Giannis didn't move. He sat there, still holding the old ball, still gripping that lifeless hand, still hearing the voice that had carried him through every doubt. He stayed until the light outside faded completely, until the nurse gently touched his shoulder. He's gone, she whispered. Giannis nodded, tears falling freely now. He whispered back, voice trembling but sure. No, he's home. He looked at the ball again, the same one from years ago, and smiled through the tears. Then he stood, taller than ever, not because he was an athlete, but because he was a legacy. And as he walked out of that hospital room, the sound of a bouncing ball echoed faintly behind him, proof that faith doesn't die. It just finds another pair of hands. The next morning was too quiet for a city that never really slept. Athens had always been a place of motion, scooters buzzing, voices spilling from cafes, children running through side streets. But that day, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Giannis stood outside Mercy General Hospital, hoodie pulled up, the same ball tucked under his arm. The air smelled like rain, though the sky hadn't decided whether to cry yet. He didn't call anyone. He didn't post a thing. No statement, no headline, no tribute tweet. This wasn't a story for the public. It was something private, sacred, a chapter between two souls that the world would never really understand. He walked to a small florist near the corner. The woman behind the counter didn't recognize him, or maybe she pretended not to. Just lilies, he said softly. White ones. For someone special? For the man who taught me everything. She nodded, said nothing more, and wrapped them gently. When he arrived at the funeral, it was quiet. No media, no reporters, just a handful of people. A few of Daniel's old players, a couple of parents, and a priest who looked like he'd known him forever. They stood in a small courtyard behind the church, birds perched on the stone fence as if even they knew this wasn't a moment for noise. The casket was simple, dark wood, no ornaments, no gold, just a whistle placed neatly on top. Giannis walked forward slowly. His steps echoed against the cobblestone. He knelt, placed the lilies beside the whistle, and then the ball, the old, taped, worn-out ball that had carried both their stories. It was more than a tribute. It was a surrender. A way of saying, "You taught me how to begin, I'll take it from here." He stood there for a long time, head bowed, while the priest spoke words that drifted somewhere between heaven and heartbreak. When the prayers ended, the others left in pairs. Giannis stayed. The wind picked up, brushing through the trees, moving the petals of the lilies like small waves. He remembered the first day they met, how Daniel said, "Faith is the bridge between talent and destiny." And he realized, faith isn't something you learn. It's something someone gives you and you spend the rest of your life trying to give it back. He whispered under his breath, almost afraid of the sound of his own voice. "Thank you, Coach." No one answered, and yet the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, like someone was still there. He closed his eyes, and for just a moment, he heard it, not from the earth, not from heaven, but from somewhere deep inside. "Don't stop now, kid. The dream still runs." A tear slid down his face, but this one didn't sting. It felt different, lighter, like the kind that comes not from pain, but from clarity. He came to say goodbye, but instead, he left with a mission. That night, Giannis didn't go back to the hotel. He drove aimlessly through the streets of Athens until he reached that old cracked court, the one where everything began. It was smaller than he remembered, half covered in leaves, the backboard chipped, the rim rusted, but the spirit of it, that was still alive. He stepped onto the court and dropped the ball. It bounced once, twice. The sound filled the empty space, echoing like it used to when he was 15. He took a deep breath and whispered into the night, "This is where you built me." He shot once. Perfect form, perfect release. The ball hit the rim, circled once, and fell through. And then it started to rain. He didn't move, didn't hide from it. He just stood there, arms open, face tilted toward the sky, as if letting the heavens wash away everything he hadn't said. The rain hit the ground softly, mixing with the sound of the ball, the heartbeat of a life that had come full circle. When he finally walked off the court, drenched but lighter than he'd been in years, he left the ball behind, right under the hoop. He didn't need to keep it anymore. It belonged there, with the echoes, with the ghosts, with the beginning. And in that storm, Giannis learned something that no victory had ever taught him, that sometimes the loudest way to honor love is through silence. Weeks passed, but the silence never fully left him. He'd go through practices, interviews, and flights, doing everything expected of a star. But each night when the noise faded, he'd find himself replaying that hospital room, the voice, the smile, the final breath. And every time he did, he heard the same words, "Teach someone the way I taught you." At first, he didn't know what that meant. He wasn't a preacher or a teacher. He was a basketball player. But Coach Daniels hadn't built players, he'd built people. And the more Giannis thought about that, the more it started to make sense. So one evening, he sat alone in his Milwaukee apartment, lights dim, the old keychain resting beside his phone. He opened his notes app and wrote 4 words at the top. Daniels Youth Foundation, Athens. That night, a new dream was born, not for trophies, but for hands still reaching in the dark. Within weeks, the calls began. Lawyers, advisors, city officials. Some said it would take years. Others said it would cost too much. But Giannis had learned something from Daniels. If the mountain's high, you start climbing anyway. He flew back to Greece, not for cameras or ceremonies, but for the kids, the ones playing barefoot, the ones who thought dreams belonged only to other countries. He found an old gym not far from the neighborhood where he grew up. The walls were cracked, the floor uneven. But when he stepped inside, he smiled. It looked exactly like the place where everything started. He hired local builders, cleaned the floor himself, and hung a single photo above the entrance. Coach Daniels, smiling in that same dusty gym, whistle around his neck. Beneath it, in small letters, faith, discipline, grace. He didn't want it to be a charity. He wanted it to be a classroom, where kids learned how to move, how to breathe, how to believe. When it opened, he didn't invite the media. He invited mothers, fathers, and children from the community. He brought food, equipment, and volunteers. And when the doors finally opened, the echo of bouncing balls filled the air again, the same rhythm that had once saved him. For the first time since the funeral, Giannis smiled without breaking. There was a boy, maybe 10, one who stood off to the side, too shy to join the drills. Giannis knelt beside him. "What's your name?" "Leo," the boy whispered. "You like basketball?" "A little." "Why just a little?" "Because I'm not good." Giannis grinned, handing him a ball. "Neither was I. Not at first." The boy looked up, unsure whether to believe him. "Really?" "Ask the floor," Giannis laughed. "It remembers how many times I fell." The kid laughed too, that same nervous laugh Giannis once had. And then, for the first time, he saw it. The spark. The one Coach Daniels used to talk about. The one that can turn hunger into hope. Over the next months, the program grew. Children who once watched from fences now dribbled inside the court. Mothers cried quietly in the stands. And every time Giannis looked at the wall, he'd whisper, "You see this, coach? You started it." Reporters eventually found out, of course. They came with cameras trying to turn it into a headline, but when they asked, "Why here? Why now?" Giannis only said, "Because someone once believed in me when nobody else did, and I'm just returning the favor." They pressed for more, but he didn't elaborate. Some things don't need explaining. Each summer he'd return. No press releases, no banners, just sneakers on the floor and laughter in the air. He'd teach the same lessons Daniels once gave him. Don't let the noise make you forget your purpose. Play grateful, not angry. Success isn't proof you made it. It's proof someone helped you get there. Every kid who joined the foundation got a simple wristband that read, "Faith over fame," and Giannis wore his every game. He'd spent his life chasing greatness. Now he was building it for others. At night, when the gym finally emptied, he'd sit alone under the hoop, the light flickering softly. The air smelled of sweat, dust, and echoes. And he'd imagine Daniels standing in the doorway, arms crossed, that same half-smile on his face. "You proud of me, coach?" And somewhere in the stillness, he could almost hear the reply, "Always." A year later, the NBA calendar marked a regular season game. But for Giannis, that night wasn't about standings or stats. It was about a promise. The arena was packed, flashing lights, roaring fans, the kind of noise that usually drowns everything human. But this time he wasn't hearing the crowd. He was hearing the echo of a whistle and the voice that lived inside it. Before the game, he stood in front of his locker. Hanging from the hook was a new wristband, "Faith over fame," beside his uniform. He tied it tight, whispering, "This one's for you, coach." He didn't tell the cameras, or even his teammates. Some dedications don't need to be spoken to be sacred. He'd played for millions before. Tonight he was playing for one. During warm-ups he moved differently, slower, more deliberate. Every shot, every stretch, every breath felt like prayer. He wasn't chasing highlights. He was chasing stillness. When the anthem ended and the lights dimmed, the announcer called his name. And for a moment, the arena felt smaller. Not because the crowd was quiet, but because the noise no longer mattered. The game started. First possession. He dribbled once, twice, spin move, layup. Easy 2 points. But he didn't celebrate. He just looked up, toward the rafters, toward the space where the cameras couldn't reach, and smiled faintly. Throughout the first half, he played with a balance few had ever seen in him. No anger, no rush, just grace and motion. His teammates felt it too, the rhythm, the calm, the purpose. It was contagious. At halftime, the coach told him, "You're locked in tonight." Giannis just nodded. "I'm home." When the fourth quarter came, The crowd was electric. The scoreboard close. Every possession mattered. But Giannis's focus wasn't on winning. It was on honoring. He scored, defended, passed, and hustled. The way Daniels taught him. Humble, relentless, grateful. And when the buzzer finally sounded, the scoreboard showed victory. But what he felt wasn't triumph. It was peace. Because sometimes the win isn't on the board. It's in the silence that follows it. As confetti began to fall, Giannis walked to center court. Reporters expected the usual: stats, quotes, performance. Instead, he asked for the microphone. The crowd fell quiet. He stood there, eyes scanning the stands, then slowly up toward the ceiling lights. "I want to dedicate this game," he began, voice low, steady, "to the man who taught me what greatness really means." The crowd stayed silent, thousands of people holding their breath. "Coach Daniels," he said, looking upward, "you're the reason I learned that success isn't what people see on TV. It's what happens when nobody's watching. It's how you treat others. It's how you live with faith when you can't see the finish line." He paused. The arena lights shimmered against the moisture in his eyes. "This one's for you, Coach, and for anyone who ever believed in someone before the world did." A roar erupted, not the usual victory cheer, but something deeper. People stood clapping slowly, some wiping their eyes. Even his teammates lined along the bench bowed their heads. The Jumbotron flashed his image, then, unexpectedly, the foundation's logo, Daniels Youth Foundation, Athens. A few seconds later, it showed a photo of Daniels himself, smiling, arms crossed, the same one that hung in the gym in Greece. The arena went silent again. Then, as if the universe had scripted it, one child in the front row lifted a small sign, "Faith over fame." Giannis saw it and smiled. That was the moment. The full circle. The point where grief finally turned into gratitude. He left the court without waving, without posing for cameras. He didn't need to. The message was already in the air, carried by thousands who would go home that night thinking about the people who made them who they were. For the first time in his career, Giannis didn't feel like a player on a stage. He felt like a messenger. Later, in the quiet of the locker room, after the reporters were gone, he sat alone. He took off the wristband, kissed it, and placed it next to the game ball. Then he whispered into the empty space, "We did it, Coach. Together." And though no one else heard it, he swore he felt it. The soft echo of a voice, familiar and proud, whispering back, "Told you you'd make me proud, kid." He smiled. Not like a champion, but like a son who finally kept his promise. The morning air in Athens felt softer than usual, as if the city itself knew what kind of day it was. The sun rose slowly, gold bleeding into the blue horizon, touching rooftops, balconies, and finally the small cemetery just outside town. Giannis stood alone at the gate, hoodie up, a single white lily in his hand. No cameras, no entourage, just him, the man the world called a champion, standing quietly before the man who made him one. He walked through rows of stone markers until he found the name etched in clean letters. Michael Daniels, 1959-2024. He taught faith to those who could not see it. He knelt down and placed the flower at the base. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "I kept my promise, Coach. The kids, they play where we used to." The wind moved through the trees, soft and patient. The world didn't need to answer. He sat there for a while, tracing the engraved letters with his thumb, as if trying to memorize their shape. He wasn't crying. Not anymore. The grief had changed. Not gone, just quieter. It had become something else. It wasn't pain now. It was presence, the kind that lingers after goodbye because love refuses to leave. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old wristband. Faith over fame. The edges were frayed, the color faded. He smiled faintly and set it beside the flower. "You told me to keep it simple," he said softly. to remember who I was before the lights. He looked up at the sky, the same sky that once stretched over that cracked court, the same sky that watched him rise, fall, and rise again. You know, Coach, I used to think greatness was about standing higher than everyone else, but now I see it's about kneeling lower than pride will let you. He laughed quietly, a short, humble sound that broke the silence in the gentlest way. After a while he stood. The early sunlight caught the chain around his neck, a tiny silver whistle identical to the one Daniels used to wear. He touched it lightly as if blessing it. He looked around. Birds perched on the fence, the air warm, calm. It felt like the world was at peace. Some legacies live in stories, others live in silence. But the rare ones, the eternal ones, live in motion. That afternoon, he returned to the foundation gym. Kids were already playing when he arrived. The court gleamed now, polished and bright, but the energy was the same. Wild, alive, hungry. When the children saw him, they ran over, laughing, shouting his name. He smiled. "You all warmed up?" "Yeah," they yelled in unison. "Good," he said. "Then let's make Coach Daniels proud." He dribbled once, twice, and the sound filled the room, echoing, alive. For a moment, he saw it. Daniels standing in the doorway, arms folded, that same half-smile on his face. It wasn't imagination. It was memory, perfectly timed. Later, after the kids left, Giannis sat on the bench alone, looking at the empty court. The light from the windows painted everything gold. He closed his eyes, hearing the echoes of laughter fade into peace. He whispered, "I get it now." He opened his eyes and smiled. It was never about basketball, was it? The world outside was moving again. Cars, voices, life. But inside that gym, time stood still. He took the whistle from around his neck, raised it to his lips and blew softly, just once. The sound bounced off the walls and faded, leaving behind that kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. "You can rest now, Coach," he murmured, the dream still running. As he walked out, the sunset washed the room in amber light. The gym door closed behind him with a soft click, but the sound that followed, faint, eternal, was the bounce of a ball still echoing somewhere deep inside the walls. And somewhere beyond the game, a coach smiled, because his greatest victory wasn't a scoreboard. It was a soul that remembered. True greatness isn't what the world sees you achieve. It's how you honor the hands that helped you get there.